Every 40,000 video tells you the same thing. The Imperial Guard has a 15-hour life expectancy. Guardsmen are cannon fodder. They die before they can learn their commanding officer's name. That number comes from one novel, Mitchell Scanlan's 15 Hours, published by Black Library in 2005, set on a single besieged world called Brucherok. One battle, one planet, one catastrophically specific set of circumstances. And what made those circumstances catastrophic wasn't the enemy, it was command. At Brucherok, newly arriving soldiers weren't equipped. Not because equipment didn't exist, because command had already decided they would die within hours of arrival. So why waste the materiel? The soldiers arrived under-equipped. They died faster because of it. Command's assumption became the mechanism of its own confirmation. The Imperium calls this efficiency. That's not a meme, that's a system. And an entire genre of 40K content has spent years treating the symptom, a single statistic from a single novel, as though it were a diagnosis of the entire Astra Militarum. This video is the prosecution of that genre. We aren't here to rank the worst jobs in the Imperium. We are here to establish what the worst fate actually is, with sourced evidence, because the answer has been screaming at the top of every comment section for years, and no video has bothered to find it. By the time we're done, you will understand why the Imperial Guard's actual conditions are considerably more complex than cannon fodder, why a Space Marine Dreadnought's existence is a genuine philosophical debate with codex receipts on both sides, and why the singular worst fate in the Imperium, the one that claims hundreds of conscious souls every single day, has never once appeared in the videos that claim to be telling you about the worst jobs the Imperium has to offer. Start with the Guardsman. The foundational error in this entire genre of content is a category collapse. Popular videos conflate two fundamentally distinct institutions, the Planetary Defense Forces and the tithed Astra Militarum. These aren't the same thing. They aren't close to the same thing. Planetary Defense Forces are planetary-level troops. Their quality, training, doctrine, and equipment vary wildly depending on what kind of world they come from. A Feral World PDF and a Hive World PDF share a name and essentially nothing else. They aren't subject to Astra Militarum standards. They aren't formally integrated into the Imperial military hierarchy. They are, in many cases, hastily assembled, locally armed, and maintained primarily to handle problems the planet's government can deal with before they become the Imperium's problem. The Astra Militarum is something else entirely. Regiments are formally tithed from planetary populations. And here is the detail that completely dismantles the cannon fodder framing. The planetary governor is personally accountable for the quality of what they deliver. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki states it plainly. As long as the planet's imperial taxes are paid and the requisite tithes of Psykers, Astra Militarum regiments, and strategic resources are delivered, the governor is free to run the planet as they choose. The inverse of that statement is the part that matters. Deliver incompetent soldiers, inadequate numbers, or troops that embarrass the tithe, and imperial scrutiny follows. Governors who fail their tithes don't get a strongly worded letter. They get replaced at best. That accountability creates systemic upward pressure on troop quality at the exact point of origin. The cannon fodder framing assumes the Imperium doesn't care what it conscripts. The actual structure of the tithe system creates powerful institutional incentives to care enormously. And then there are the Harakoni Warhawks. From the world of Harakon, these are elite airborne drop troops, not standard infantry, not PDF equivalents pressed into guard uniforms, but a regiment that has built its entire doctrine around precision, high-altitude insertion into contested zones. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki describes their specialized abilities as having found a specific and valued home in the Imperial Guard, where regiments drawn from Harakon operate as elite airborne drop troops. Drop troop operations require a level of training, coordination, and equipment that casual content about cannon fodder dying in 15 hours simply can't account for. You don't insert elite infantry behind enemy lines from high altitude by accident. You train for it, extensively, for years. The Catachans come from a death world so hostile that the planet itself kills most of its inhabitants before they ever hold a weapon, which means every Catachan who survives to enlist has already endured conditions that would kill the average soldier from a civilized world before the first week ends. By the time a Catachan trooper picks up a weapon in service of the Emperor, they have spent their entire life navigating an ecosystem that is actively, continuously trying to kill them. The fauna is carnivorous and enormous. The flora is worse. Children on Catachan don't play, they survive. The ones who make it to adulthood aren't ordinary soldiers who happen to get a hard posting. They are the products of an unforgiving selection process that operated on the entire planetary population across generations, and the regiments they form reflect that heritage in their close quarters doctrine, their survival instincts, and a cultural contempt for comfort that their commanders have learned to treat as a tactical asset rather than a discipline problem. The Cadians grew up inside a military culture, on a world where military readiness wasn't a profession but an identity ingrained from birth. A world that sat at the edge of the galaxy's largest and most dangerous warp anomaly, constantly on the frontier of something that made every other threat in the Imperium look manageable by comparison. Cadian culture didn't produce soldiers by accident. It produced them by design, consciously and deliberately, because Cadia's geography made incompetence an extinction-level risk. These aren't outliers in a sea of expendable conscripts. They are the logical output of a tied system that rewards quality and punishes governors who fail to deliver it. The standard weapon these soldiers carry isn't the primitive equipment the meme implies. The lasgun's primary advantage is absolute logistical independence. It requires no ammunition supply chain. It recharges via heat source or power cell. The fandom wiki cites lore support for a lasgun that requires only minimal ritual maintenance, a brief cleaning after use, and can sustain over 10,000 shots under those conditions. No ammunition manufacturing, no resupply convoys, no running dry in an extended engagement because the supply train got ambushed 3 systems back. For an empire operating across 1 million worlds with a warp transit system that is, at its best, unreliable, and at its worst, a direct conduit for things that shouldn't exist, that logistical independence is a foundational strategic advantage that every serious commander in this universe accounts for. The rate of fire isn't the point. The point is that the weapon works on the far side of a multi-year campaign when every other supply line has failed, and then keeps working. Guardsmen also receive pay, actual pay, monthly stipends and thrones, the Imperium's currency, plus local scrip redeemable for goods and services on the world where they're deployed. For soldiers recruited from worlds where serfdom and indentured labor are unremarkable features of daily existence, enlisting in the Astra Militarum represents genuine social mobility. Regular food, structured command, wages used for gambling and alcohol, which is to say wages used like wages everywhere across every era of human history. The meme imagines conscripts dragged from hovels to die nameless in a ditch. The actual institutional structure of the Astra Militarum looks considerably more like an army than the meme allows. None of this erases the genuine horror of what happened at Brucherok. Scanlan's actual horror in 15 hours isn't in the statistic, it's in the mechanism. Command decided the soldiers were expendable before they arrived. That decision made them expendable. The system ate itself and called the result inevitable. The disturbing thing about the novel isn't a number, but a logic, the self-fulfilling bureaucratic prophecy of an institution that mistakes cruelty for efficiency. Understanding that distinction between the systemic excellence of the Astra Militarum at its best and the systemic cruelty of individual commands operating at their worst is what the meme destroys by flattening everything into a single 6-word factoid. Now move up the scale. From a soldier who might survive or might not, depending on where and when and under what command, to something the genre confidently calls a worse fate, a space marine entombed in a dreadnought chassis. The popular framing is straightforward. A Marine too broken to fight normally gets sealed inside a mechanical walker, trapped, isolated, deteriorating across centuries of dormancy, punctuated by brief, violent waking. A prison they can never leave. A slow, psychological death in an armored coffin. That framing has sourcing. Lore across different editions and novels does describe the extreme oscillation between total sensory deprivation during stasis and overwhelming sensory overload in combat. And the argument exists that this oscillation, sustained across centuries or millennia, reshapes a dreadnought's identity in ways that aren't benign. The stasis and battle cycle slows deterioration. It doesn't stop it. Some sources state explicitly that most loyalist dreadnoughts are kept in stasis sleep when not needed for battle, an acknowledgement that the waking state is something to be rationed. That isn't the description of a comfortable existence, whatever the official framing might say. But the countervailing sourcing is also real. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki describes venerable dreadnoughts as revered not just as potent warriors, but as ageless forebears and living embodiments of battles fought long ago. The vast amount of knowledge and experience earned over millennia places them in the highest regard within their chapters. A dreadnought who fought at a famous engagement 10,000 years ago carries first-hand tactical knowledge that no skull library, no written record, no second-hand account can replicate. When a venerable dreadnought falls in battle, an entire lived history falls with it. 10,000 years of accumulated experience specific to the campaigns this individual fought, the enemies they faced personally, the strategies they watched succeed and fail in real time across 100 worlds, gone when the sarcophagus goes dark. Chapters that lose their oldest dreadnoughts lose institutional memory that no amount of written history can fully reconstruct. The interment process itself is broadly held in the lore community to be typically voluntary. A Space Marine facing otherwise fatal wounds, still deemed worthy of continued service, may be offered the choice rather than simply being placed there against their will. Primary codex sourcing for this is difficult to pin to a specific edition, and the claim rests largely on community consensus rather than a confirmed direct text, so treat that accordingly. The transition from flesh to armored chassis is framed within Space Marine culture as continuation, not imprisonment. Whether the subjective experience of centuries in stasis vindicates that framing is precisely where the debate lives. So which is it? Honored living library or deteriorating prisoner? The honest answer is that even the lore community debates this. Both framings have sourcing in official material. The debate turns on edition, on specific novel, on whether a given source is describing standard dreadnoughts or venerable dreadnoughts with centuries more accumulated stasis time. Any video that replaces one confident overclaim with a different confident overclaim in the opposite direction is committing the same error as the original. The evidence is genuinely contested, and acknowledging that isn't weakness. It's how this audience knows you actually read the sources. What isn't contested, and what has never been addressed in the genre at all, is the worst fate in the Imperium. The Emperor of Mankind sits on the Golden Throne. He has sat there since the end of the Horus heresy, near dead from wounds inflicted by Horus himself, interred in a machine that was never designed for permanent life support. Originally, the throne was a navigational instrument, built to allow the Emperor to construct and navigate the Webway, an ancient network of tunnels through reality that would have given humanity safe passage through a universe of psychic hazards. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, breached that Webway project in an attempt to warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery, destroying it and forcing the Emperor onto the throne to seal the rupture. And then the wounds Horus inflicted made that throne a permanent necessity. That is the single sentence of context that matters, because everything downstream of that moment, every black ship, every collection, every soul fed to that machine, traces back to one act in one war 10,000 years ago. What the throne now requires, what keeps the Emperor alive, what keeps the Astronomicon burning, what allows warp travel across 1,000,000 worlds, is psychers, consumed daily. 1,000 psychers per day give their lives to maintain the Emperor's psychic strength, a figure traceable to the original Rogue Trader rulebook, though the exact text wasn't directly retrieved in available research, so treat it accordingly. That number, multiplied across the millennia since the heresy ended, produces a figure that resists comprehension. Now understand the mechanism. Psychers are collected across the Imperium by the Black Ships, vast fleet vessels operated by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Untrained psychers are a psychic hazard. They attract demons. They create ruptures in the barrier between real space and the warp. They destabilize the communities around them with effects that range from disturbing to catastrophic, depending on the strength of the individual and the thinness of the local warp boundary. The Black Ships exist partly to protect the Imperium from these individuals. Collect them before they become a crisis. Assess them. Determine what they are useful for. The collection is systematic, thorough, and old enough that entire planetary cultures have developed rituals around the arrival of the Black Ships. Prayers, ceremonies, ways of explaining to children what is going to happen to the family member who has started seeing things no one else can see. The collected psychers deemed insufficiently powerful to train as sanctioned operatives, those who can't be controlled, those who are simply surplus to every other requirement, feed the throne. They don't feed it in the sense of being interred or preserved or given any kind of continuation. They feed it in the sense of fuel, soul fuel. The psychic energy is consumed, and the person it belonged to is gone. This has been happening continuously within a dedicated institutional framework since the 31st millennium. There are departments for it, titles, procedures, the correct blessings to be spoken at each stage of processing. The Adeptus Mechanicus has maintained the consuming mechanism across 10,000 years of continuous operation. The architecture of the whole thing is bureaucratic. The scale is industrial. The actual experience, for the human being inside it, is something else entirely. What lore community sources confirm, via a prose passage depicting this process, is the detail that makes the mechanism genuinely unbearable. The psyker bound for the throne is fully conscious. She beats her fists against the window of her coffin as it sways. She feels what is happening. Their screams and prayers and panic and fears entwine, as the source describes it, unseen by all. Not sedated, not unconscious, not granted the mercy of unknowing. Fully present for every moment of their own annihilation. The Imperium frames this as an act of holy devotion. The paperwork has been filed. The rites have been spoken. The Adeptus Mechanicus has blessed the mechanism that will consume them. The ecclesiarchy has confirmed that their deaths are acts of devotion. They sustain the light by which 1,000,000 worlds navigate the dark. They serve the Emperor in the most direct sense that any human being can serve him. They become him, or rather they become the fuel that keeps the machine, that keeps the man, that keeps the Imperium intact. Every procedure has been followed, every form signed in the correct order, every blessing administered at the correct stage of processing, and they are screaming the entire time. Every 40,000 worst jobs video talks about guardsmen dying in 15 hours. None of them, not one, has addressed the daily industrial consumption of hundreds of conscious human souls that has been running continuously since the end of the Horus heresy. The audience noticed. Comments with dozens and hundreds of engagements flagged the psyker sacrifice as an obvious omission. One comment with 59 combined engagements clarified explicitly that the Emperor's power includes the life, the powers, and possibly the soul of psyker humans sacrificed daily. A figure that audience member put at thousands, though the lore itself anchors at 1,000. Another referenced being one of the 1,000 psychers sacrificed daily. These aren't fringe corrections buried in a thread no one reads. They represent the lore-literate core of this content's own viewership, the people the creator was supposedly making the video for, telling the creator, in public, with hundreds of likes, what the video missed. This is the verdict. The worst fate in the Imperium is being a psyker collected by the Black Ships who didn't make the cut for sanctioned training. It isn't dying in battle before you learn your sergeant's name. It isn't a space marine interred in a war machine with a lore community genuinely split on whether that's an honor or a torment. Those involve death, or they involve something at least framed as honor, or they, at minimum, offer the possibility of a story about what happened to you and what it meant. The psyker delivered to the Golden Throne has no story the Imperium will ever tell. The institution has already decided what they are. They are fuel. The collection was routine. Tomorrow, there will be another black ship arrival with another complement of souls who didn't make the cut, and the machine will consume them with the same procedural thoroughness it has brought to every day of the last 10,000 years. But the Imperium isn't finished designing horror. There is one further category, and it must be named accurately because it isn't a job. A penitent engine is a sentence. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, the militant arm of the ecclesiarchy, deploy these machines in combat. A penitent engine is a combat walker to which the condemned is hardwired at the front, fully exposed to enemy fire. Not enclosed in any protective chassis, not shielded. The person inside exercises no conventional control over the machine. The engine is driven, as the source describes it, by the pilot's frantic need for forgiveness. They go where the machine goes and do what the machine does, and they feel all of it. They rely, as the lore puts it plainly, on the Emperor's judgment for survival. The condemned inside a penitent engine has committed some crime serious enough to warrant this particular sentence from the ecclesiarchy. Heresy, cowardice, acts that brought shame on the institution, failure of faith significant enough to require public atonement through suffering. The theological framework is specific. The condemned must suffer, and suffer visibly, and continue suffering until death finds them in battle. The Imperium isn't interested in their death as an endpoint. Their penitence is the process, and the process requires their full presence for every moment of it. This isn't a job in the Imperium. There is no application, no tithe, no enlistment, no social mobility argument. It's a punishment. One designed with considerable institutional care to be exactly as terrible as it sounds, for exactly as long as the institution decides it should last. The popular genre of 40K content treats Imperial horror as accidental, as though the Imperium built a terrible civilization through negligence, through the dysfunction of managing 1,000,000 worlds without adequate infrastructure, through the entropy of a system too large to govern properly. Some of that is true. Incompetence and entropy are real forces in this setting, and they produce real suffering. But the penitent engine wasn't built by accident. The Golden Throne's consumption process wasn't an oversight that someone failed to correct across 10,000 years. The self-fulfilling prophecy at Brushirok, command deciding soldiers were expendable before they arrived, guaranteeing they would be, wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system operating as designed, achieving the outcome it had pre-selected, and filing the result under acceptable losses. The Imperium doesn't waste horror. It codifies it, gives it a name, assigns it a department, writes the blessing that gets spoken over it, files the record in a building on Holy Terra that has been receiving such records for 10,000 years, each one correctly formatted, each one signed by the appropriate authority, each one representing a decision that was made deliberately and consciously by people who understood exactly what they were deciding. The difference between 40K content that gets shared and corrected in equal measure and content that actually lands with this audience is the difference between a meme and a mechanism. Memes tell you guardsmen die in 15 hours. Mechanisms tell you why, and why it was always going to happen that way, and who decided, and what they called it when they filed the paperwork. The worst fate in the Imperium isn't a job. It's being a psyker in the wrong century, on the wrong ship, at the wrong moment. Fully conscious, fully present, and absolutely certain of what is coming. 1,000 times a day, every day, since the 31st millennium. The Imperium calls this the price of civilization. The individuals inside that process have other words for it, but they don't get to use them for very long. If you want to keep prosecuting Imperial memes, if you know which piece of popular 40K content gets the next fact catastrophically wrong, subscribe and we'll find the receipts.